Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Over the past few weeks, I've been introducing you to presenters of the Caring Conference, which is happening March 25th. And I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Taylor Calderone. Hi, Taylor. Thanks for being here with me today.
Hi, Denise. Thanks so much for having me.
So the theme of our conference is our treasured transformations. And Taylor, your presentation is really around your identity and how that transformed through a really difficult period of time for you in your life. It was when you were caring for your mom and then your dad as you were starting your own family.
Exactly.
Such pivotal times for you. And it makes sense that you started to question, who am I? So what's really remarkable too about your transformation is it seems like you went through it and then you realized you had transformed. It wasn't something you were aware of during.
Absolutely not.
So tell us what made you realize, oh my gosh, I have transformed.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us get into this space from personal caregiving experience. And so, as I'm sure a number of listeners could relate, when you're in it, you're in this, just whirlwind of emotions and physical demands. And really, your goal is get to tomorrow. And so, there wasn't a lot of time for self reflection. Um, I was really so focused on my kids and my parents and just making sure that everybody had what they needed, usually not so much concerned about whether or not I had what I needed. And I think that's what a lot of people experience. But it was really just, I was in survival mode for so long that when I came out of it and the dust settled and I had a chance to go back and reflect on it, you realize everything that happened behind it all, behind the daily tasks and the doctor's appointments and the hospitals and the middle of the night phone calls and the feeding, the middle of the night feedings, for my kids, that there was this deep pivotal transformation really that occurred kind of while you weren't even looking.
What's interesting about your work in the world now is this idea that we don't have to be defined by, I guess, traditional career definitions, that we can transform our identity and still really think about the valuable work we do in the world, even if that work isn't part of a company, for instance.
Absolutely.
So tell us how that insight about our work in the world came up for you.
Sure. So, in the midst of all this happening, my mom got sick and I got pregnant in my late 20s. And then quickly followed my dad's sickness and my second child. So late 20s or early 30s was when I was going through all this. And that's also usually the time that you're defining your own career and who you want to be in the world. And I wasn't, and I think I struggled a lot with, especially being a female and sort of growing up being told, to break the glass ceiling and lean in, right? All these buzzwords that we're talking about. And I was watching my peers do it. And I went to college, I went to grad school. I thought I was going to be pursuing a career. And all of a sudden, when I wasn't, I struggled myself with that and what that meant and how that defined me. And I came to this realization that, the work that I was doing, while it didn't give me a paycheck and while I didn't, I no longer was putting on high heels and commuting to New York City, I wasn't doing any of that anymore. It was just so vitally important to be there and, and shepherd my children through those first years and my parents through those last years. And I think it's, it's something that I fear that we're losing or have even lost as a society, to appreciate really what caregiving is, what it does for us as a society. It really contributes so much, at the early years, but also at the later years. It grants a dignity. And I don't think that we give enough credit to the real work, and the vocation that caregiving is.
And I would imagine at this point in your life, you're starting your family, you're caring for your parents at the end of your life, at the end of their life.
Mhm.
I would imagine there wasn't much in terms of peer support just because other peers weren't experiencing something similar in their life.
Oh, absolutely. They were experiencing the early, being a mother and confronting that, but they weren't losing their mother. Their mother was in there helping, and right in there with them. It was this multi-generational experience. And I'll be completely honest, I was very jealous, I was bitter, I was angry, and I struggled a lot with that. And that was part of the transformation too, is realizing and finding your way. One of the things I'm going to talk about in the presentation, and Bruce and Heather, the other presenters, talked on this a little bit too, this paradox of caregiving, right? We sort of have these dual emotions that coexist. And so in my presentation, I'm going to talk some about how my identity at once did go through this amazing transformation, and at the same time, it never changed at all. And realizing that that's okay, and so I'm hoping that what I can give to others in the presentation, whether they are family caregivers or whether they are paid professional caregivers. And I wish we had a different way to talk about that, because I think family caregivers are professional in a lot of ways, but for lack of better terminology, for both sides of our audience that I know will have, I hope that they can, come out of this with an easier way to think about and embrace rather than fight their own identity transformations. And for the professional caregiver to really look at what the caregiver, in addition to the patient, is going through. The best caregivers I encountered were the ones who didn't talk just to my parents or just to me, as if my parents weren't even there, but really holistically looked at us together and spoke with us as far as their health plans and things like that. So, I'm going to use a little bit of weather analogies to give us some concrete ways to think about our own identities as we go through this caregiving experience.
Could I ask you about how you identified with the emotions of the experience? So you talked about, understandably so, thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I had what other peers had,
Right.
which is a mom who could help, a dad who could help. It makes sense that you would have this emotional response that could very much just fall into bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to transform how you looked at yourself, but you also had to transform how you felt about your life.
Sure. Yeah.
So how did you transform from this temptation really to just fall into that bitterness and instead pivot into whatever word it is that you would describe about where you pivoted to?
I mean, let's be honest, I'm still going through it. My parents have since passed away. My children are elementary school age now, but I wouldn't by any means say that I have completed the process. I am certainly much further along than I was. And I think a big part of that has been being able to, share with others and start writing about the experience, and, getting involved with something like this with you, Denise, and realizing that, hey, there's so much more out there. And I wish when I was going through it, I knew that. And I think I didn't, I wish I had connected. And like I said earlier, it's really just a day-to-day survival mode. And I wasn't reaching out for that in the way that I should have. If somebody probably had told me in the middle of it, oh, you know what, you should spend a day on a caregiving conference, I would have laughed at them. And I realize now on the other side of it, how transformative that would have been for me. And so I hope that I can sort of give back what I can to others who may be going through that, and that I would be able to explain what I wish I had known. I think it's just so important to be there for others.
I think it's interesting. We all flirt with bitterness. I mean, sometimes she's a constant companion, and other times I feel like, oh, she's in my past. I see her in the rear view mirror,
Yeah.
but oh my gosh. And I think it's really interesting to think about, well, how do we transform that emotion? Because as you talk about, that is a process. That's a process. And I think
Absolutely.
it also is a process that's tied to grief, because
Yes.
you were grieving so many losses prior to your
Mhm.
parents' death. And I think if maybe someone had just transformed a perspective for you, it would have been, oh, of course I feel this way. Of course, it makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and that would have been crucial. I think that a lot of those who did try to reach out, I think often did so by comparing their own experiences to mine. And they were much older than me, losing parents who were in their 90s at that point, and telling me, oh, I understand what it's like to lose a mom. And it wasn't a mature response, but my first response in my head, I didn't say it, but was one of anger and just, you don't understand. And I would push back. And I think one of the things I learned is that none of our experiences are the same. Our grief experiences, our caregiving experiences, they're not the same. But there is so much, I think, that we can learn from others who are going through this part of life, which we're all going to go through in different ways and at different times. But I wish I hadn't been closed off to that. And I admit that I was, for a very, very long time. And I think it's so important to just be able to have this connection, and especially in these times, right? I sort of entered the pandemic right after all of this happened. So, to be able to experience this, what I needed really was this sense of community, and suddenly the whole world shut down.
There's a tone deafness when we compare our situation to another's.
Yes.
Recognizing that each situation has very different variables,
Absolutely.
which means that there are some common pieces, and oftentimes it can be emotional, but yet we are all different in our caregiving experience. And I think well-meaning individuals sometimes miss that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so important what you just said, well-meaning, right? Everybody is very well-meaning. They're trying to reach out and meet you where you are. Sometimes it's in trying to do that we, find ourselves pushing back, and I think it's learning how to navigate that and how to talk about it that's most important.
Absolutely, which is why a community has to be inclusive of all different situations,
Absolutely.
all different individuals, all different cultures, because even culture to culture, there are really,
Sure.
interesting differences, which means that within your culture, you might feel more supported connecting to someone else who understands
Yes.
that culture expects of you or means to you or is part of your day for you.
Absolutely.
And what I like about it is this becomes this conversation about diversity. And diversity is around situations. It's
Mhm.
about our belief systems. It's about our culture. It's about where we live. It's about the choice in terms of how we live. And a community has to be inclusive of all those different categories of diversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well said.
In our facilitator training, for those who want to start a support group, we talk about that tone deaf support group member who wants every situation to be just like hers.
Yes.
And
So
yeah,
well meaning.
yes, very well meaning. And it is frustrating. And I will tell you, it is a common frustration among family caregivers. I had a family caregiver that was part of my community who cared for her husband, who was in his 50s when he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. He had to leave his career before he was ready, and it was a career he loved.
Oh,
He had a shift in identity because his career was no longer part of his day. And she would attend support group meetings, and it was well-meaning individuals in their 80s caring for a spouse. And it was such a disconnect between what life was like for them.
sure.
And we had, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm so glad you brought up Alzheimer's too, and dementia, because I think that puts such a different layer on this transformation of identity. I remember the first time that my mom looked at me and asked how my mom was. And I froze, and obviously we knew it was coming, but that moment for me, more than any other, with any of her other confusion or questions or anything like that, was just, it was like a punch to the gut. And so while your own identity is transforming, if you're a child of any age taking care of a parent and suddenly you're parenting your parent, right? That's an identity transformation. But when that person you're caring for no longer knows who you are, that sort of shatters, I think, your own identity, and you start to question a lot in a very different way. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of that too in my presentation, just in the ways that can affect how we go through the caregiving experience.
We're devoting a day to transformation, and our conversation is making me think a day is not enough, but we're going to start with a day.
I know.
We're going to start with a day, and we can continue the conversation about transformation after the conference as well on our community, which is caringourway.com. So I just want to remind you, March 25th is the day of our event. You can join us. It's free by going to caringourway.com. We have a special group for the Caring Conference, and then you can just RSVP for the workshops you'd want to attend. You can earn CEUs if you're a healthcare professional. We have more information about CEUs. You can earn as many as 7. It's a flat rate of $20, and caringourway.com has more information about that as well. Taylor, for those of us who'd like to stay in touch with you, how can we connect with you?
Sure. So I am pretty active on Twitter. That's probably the best way to reach me. I have my DMs open, so you can find me at, and then it's just my name, Taylor Calderone. So TaylorCalderone. And feel free to message me on there.
I just want to mention it works because that's how Taylor and I connected.
Absolutely. That's right.
It works.
It
works.
does. It does. I know. I hesitated for a long time to get on, but it is such an amazing community. When used correctly, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, Taylor, Twitter is my go-to. And I started earlier this year what I call Care List. On Thursdays, I'll post a question, and usually it's, what are your top 3? What are the 3? And then I ask people to answer. And Taylor, you've been really a fabulous participant in sharing your list, so to speak.
Oh, well, thank you for including me in that. I kind of wedged my way into that into that circle with you, but thank you for including me. And it's been valuable. Like sometimes people say things that just, wow, it just transforms, buzzword, my way of thinking about my own experience, and just the different, the ways that people are coming at this. There's such amazing insights being shared.
So I want to mention the name of Taylor's workshop. It is the person I am, navigating our transforming identities as caregivers. Okay, Taylor, we'll see you on March 25th. Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Denise.
Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Again, go to caringourway.com for more information about the Caring Conference, which takes place on March 25th. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.